In Chapter 20, we're going to be talking about a subject that we're grouping in with evolution as part of our next test, but it's really not part of evolution at all. We're going to be talking about ideas for the origin of life on Earth. And again, this isn't an evolution chapter, but there's really no other place to put it during the year, so we kind of stick it here. Before we get into the main topics of this chapter, I want to emphasize the difference between hypothesis and theory when used by scientists. And I want to point out, we've been talking about natural selection for the last 3 chapters. Natural selection is a theory. It's a theory that explains evolution. Evolution is a known fact. Natural selection is the theory for how we believe evolution takes place, or the primary method by which it takes place. Now, that's a theory. That's a major explanation that's accepted by scientists. We don't have a theory for how life began. So when we start talking about ideas of where life started out, that's not part of the theory of natural selection or the theory of evolution, for people who like to call it that. There is no theory. Not only is there no theory, there's really no way we can really have a theory about this, at least no way that I can picture we really could end up with a theory, because we can't really test it. We can't go back in time and start with the Earth with no life and test and see if we can somehow make life appear there. So what do we have? Well, we have hypotheses, proposals that people have come up with of, this is maybe a way that life could have begun. Now let's say you come up with a hypothesis that seems really good. You test your hypothesis in some lab setting and somehow can make life begin the way you've kind of proposed. The problem there is, even if you have a valid hypothesis that tests out to be a way that life can begin, that's not going to prove that's how life did begin. For example, if you get in a hot air balloon and you travel to California, that doesn't mean when you get out you can look at all the people there and say, wow, look at all these people who got here by hot air balloon. Just because you prove that something can be done one way, that doesn't mean it was always done in that way. So that's why this is going to be something that I don't really see any theory ever really being accepted for this. Although there are some hypotheses that have been out there that have been disproven, other hypotheses have been supported. So we're going to talk about some of those hypotheses, especially that tend to receive support. So we need to start out by going before biology, because biology is the study of life, and we're discussing how life began, so we have to go back before any biology would exist. And just as a reminder, when you hear the Big Bang Theory, that has nothing to do with evolution and nothing to do with the origin of life. Big Bang Theory explains how matter began. This is a physics theory. I'm not going to even try to pretend to explain it here because I'm not a physicist, and I'm sure that my explanation is very low level on the Big Bang Theory. But that it kind of explains, often people explain it as the beginning of the universe, but truly again it's the beginning of matter in the universe. And as far as when we think this took place, somewhere in the ballpark, we use nice round numbers here, about 14 billion years ago. So we're talking a very, very long time ago for the Big Bang. Now, our sun, which is, remember, a star very close to us here, our sun we think was formed sometime around roughly 5 billion years ago. So we think that matter in the universe existed for roughly 9 billion years before our sun ever formed. And shortly after the sun formed, somewhere around 4.6 billion years ago is the number that's usually thrown about, we think it was about the time that Earth first formed. Although at first the Earth was not like the Earth we know it today at all. And then again, somewhat recently, again talking about relatively very long terms, but compared to 14 billion years ago, the Earth forming around 4.6 billion years ago, only about 3.8 billion years ago, so less than a billion years later, we think was when life showed up on Earth. And this is based on record we have in the rock layers of the Earth that we kind of think that. Now, how do you get from the Earth with no life to Earth with life? That's where the hypotheses come in. And a guy by the name of Stanley Miller did some experiments back, over 50 years ago, looking at what we thought the Earth maybe was like back before there was life. And the belief back in the mid-20th century in terms of what primitive Earth was like before life was that there was water, there was hydrogen gas, there was ammonia, there was methane, and a lot of electricity in the form of like lightning storms. So Stanley Miller took those materials, put them into a glass container, ran electricity through those materials, and he formed amino acids. Now, that's a big deal because amino acids are usually only associated with life forms. So the fact that he did get from these inorganic compounds plus methane and got to amino acids is a pretty big deal. So some people looked at that and said, wow, we just proved that you can get life spontaneously forming. Well, there's a problem with that. there wasn't any life form, and it's not like when he let this experiment keep running, he didn't suddenly get cells and little critters running around in there. He simply got amino acids, which are not alive. They're just organic molecules. So there's a flaw there. Another flaw is more recent data indicates that may not have been exactly what primitive Earth was like in that time period. So we need to kind of take this as, yes, it's a really interesting experiment. It's a really cool experiment to make this happen, but it doesn't prove anything in terms of what happened in the past or even what may have happened in the past. So let's look at some other hypotheses. What else do we have? Well, one idea is that life came here from another planet. This hypothesis is referred to as panspermia, where there was life somewhere else in the universe. It somehow traveled here maybe on an asteroid that knocked off from some other planet, ended up coming here and landing and brought life with it. Or my personal favorite version of this, people explain that there was a group of aliens that were traveling through the universe on vacation. They stopped here, emptied out their septic tank, and we evolved from what was left behind in their toilets, basically. That's actually a hypothesis out there. And you never know. To me, the real flaw with this hypothesis is all it does is pass the buck. If life began on another planet, how did it begin on that planet? We still haven't answered that question. Another idea is that life formed spontaneously somewhere out in space, didn't form spontaneously on Earth, but again, it was carried here from somewhere else. Again, it explains how life began on Earth, but not how it began somewhere else in space. And we're back to the Stanley Miller experiment, which may or may not really prove anything. Or the hypothesis that seems to be getting the most traction among scientists lately is that life formed on the ocean floor here on Earth, right at the volcanic events. In fact, there are some scientists that believe that not only did life first form on the ocean floor on Earth, but that it continues to form. There are some scientists that believe that currently, right now, there are life forms spontaneously forming at these volcanic vents. Very interesting. Tough to experiment on. It's tough to work down there. It's too much pressure for a human body. Obviously, you're really, really deep down. Also, the heat produced at these vents and the sulfuric acid produced is really, really dangerous, even for our materials to work and study this remotely. Okay, so what was the Earth's atmosphere like back before life began? That's still open to some debate. Also, we really can't, again, go back and study it, so we have to kind of look at indirect evidence in things like the rocks. One thing that we are fairly certain of is that there really wasn't much free oxygen, no O2 in the atmosphere. We're not saying oxygen didn't exist as an element, but no O2 that would have been very reactive. The reason we're pretty sure of this is because iron deposits in the rock that are from this time period, from before about 3.8 billion years ago, doesn't really show any signs of rust. And the fact you have iron and water, but no rust, remembers what you get when iron and oxygen mix together, makes people think probably there was no oxygen there. But the reason we care about this is because if there was no oxygen, that does make it more likely that complex molecules could have somehow spontaneously changed form without reacting with the oxygen. Oxygen is extremely reactive and tends to break down molecules before they could build up a complexity that we would need in order for life to spontaneously form. So the lack of oxygen, to many people, indicates that possibly you could have had molecules just simply reacting to eventually form life forms. So what we're going to be focusing on is how you could get complex molecules, starting with really just very simple or inorganic molecules. That's the end of the first part of Chapter 20 for us. Stay tuned to how we think these molecules might have progressed into life forms, and make sure you bring your questions to class. This is a topic with some interesting ideas we can discuss here, so bring those questions to class, and have a great day.